In the summer of 1518, a woman in Strasbourg stepped into the street and started dancing. She didn't stop. Not that day, not the next, not for a full week. Within a month, hundreds of people had joined her, dancing uncontrollably, some for days on end, and several of them reportedly danced until they collapsed and died. Nobody forced them to. Nobody could make them stop. And 500 years later, historians still argue about what actually happened. Welcome back to Gallows Geek, where today we're doing one of the strangest, most well-documented mass events in European history. A plague that didn't spread through coughing or rats, but through something that looks on paper a whole lot more like a really disturbing party that nobody could leave. Let's start with the woman who kicked the whole thing off, Frau Trothea. In July 1518, she walked into a street in Strasbourg, a city in what's now eastern France, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, and started dancing. No music, no celebration, no apparent reason. Her husband, according to some accounts, begged her to stop. She didn't or couldn't, and she just kept going. Hours turned into days. By the end of the first week, contemporary records say she'd been joined by roughly 36 other people, all dancing with the same fevered, involuntary intensity, seemingly unable to stop themselves even as exhaustion visibly set in, sweating, bleeding feet, collapsing only to get back up and keep moving. City officials watching this spiral made a decision that in hindsight is almost impressively wrong. They decided the dancers needed to dance it out. Literally. The prevailing medical theory at the time was that this was some kind of hot blood affliction, and the accepted treatment for hot blood was more dancing, to burn through it and let it pass naturally. Much like how a fever was sometimes treated by piling on more blankets to sweat it out. So the city built stages. They hired actual musicians to play for the dancers. They cleared out guild halls specifically to give people more room to keep going, and even brought in strongmen to help support exhausted dancers who could no longer stand on their own, but still couldn't stop moving. Local authorities were, essentially, actively fueling the exact behavior that was killing people, because it was what the medicine of the day recommended. A genuinely well-intentioned response that made everything catastrophically worse. By its peak in August, contemporary accounts suggest as many as 400 people were dancing through Strasbourg streets at once. An entire city district effectively overtaken by people who couldn't or wouldn't stop moving. And the death toll? This is the part that separates the dancing plague from just being a weird historical footnote. Accounts from the period describe multiple dancers a day collapsing from heart attacks, strokes, and sheer physical exhaustion. Their bodies simply giving out after days without proper rest, food, or water. Estimates on the actual death count vary wildly depending on the source, from a handful up to as many as 15 a day at the event's worst point. Though modern historians treat the higher numbers with some skepticism, given how records from this period tend to exaggerate for dramatic or moralizing effect. Even the more conservative estimates still describe a genuinely alarming number of deaths for what, on its face, sounds like it should be a harmless, if bizarre, spectacle. Eventually, city authorities changed their approach entirely, realizing, correctly, that giving people a stage and a band was possibly not the cure they'd hoped for, and instead started shipping afflicted dancers off to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, a saint associated in local folklore with a curse that supposedly caused involuntary dancing. Dancers were taken to the shrine, given red shoes to wear, and made to walk around a wooden statue of the saint in what was essentially a religious ritual designed to break the curse rather than treat a medical condition. Whether it was the change in approach, the passage of time, exhaustion simply running its course, or something else entirely, the epidemic gradually faded out by early September, roughly 2 months after it started, leaving behind a body count and a story that would outlive every single person who witnessed it. So what actually caused hundreds of people to dance themselves toward death in the middle of a European city, with no music, no coordination, and seemingly no ability to stop? Let's run through the leading theories. Theory 1. Ergot poisoning. Ergot is a toxic fungus that grows on rye and other grains, especially in damp conditions. and it's genuinely capable of causing hallucinations, convulsions, and muscle spasms. Some of its compounds are chemically related to LSD, which is actually how LSD itself was first synthesized centuries later. It's a popular explanation because 1518 followed a period of poor harvests, meaning grain shortages that could have pushed people toward eating spoiled or moldy rye they'd normally have discarded, out of sheer desperation not to go hungry. The problem with this theory is that ergot poisoning typically causes violent, uncoordinated convulsions and severely impairs a person's ability to control their limbs. Not the kind of sustained, rhythmic, hours-long dancing that eyewitnesses specifically described across multiple independent accounts. It's hard to reconcile loss of muscle control with danced continuously on rhythm for days. Theory 2, and the one most modern historians actually favor: mass psychogenic illness. The same broad phenomenon we talked about with the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, just with a wildly different expression roughly 400 years earlier. The years leading up to 1518 in Strasbourg were genuinely brutal. Famine from repeated failed harvests, disease outbreaks including syphilis and smallpox, and crushing economic hardship had piled up on the population for years, leaving people malnourished, exhausted, and living under near constant fear of the next disaster. Add in a strong regional folk belief in St. Vitus's dancing curse, the idea that offending the saint could result in a forced, punishing dance as divine retribution, and you have a population primed on a deep psychological level to express extreme collective stress through exactly this specific behavior. Because the cultural script for what happens when you're cursed like this already existed in everyone's heads, ready to be acted out the moment someone else demonstrated it first. This theory gets real support from the fact that other smaller dancing plagues had already been recorded in the same general region in prior centuries, going back as far as the 11th century in some accounts. This wasn't a one-off invention. It was a recognized, culturally understood phenomenon that Strasbourg's population would have known about, and crucially, expected as a real possible outcome of extreme stress or divine punishment. Once the first few cases appeared and got public attention, the psychological contagion had a ready-made template to spread along, the same way a well-known urban legend can shape how an entire community interprets an ambiguous event once it starts circulating. There's also a simpler, more mundane theory worth mentioning. Some historians argue that at least part of what got recorded as an uncontrollable dancing plague may have actually been a fringe religious sect or cult engaging in ecstatic, ritualistic dancing, behavior that looked pathological to outside chroniclers, but may have had more voluntary ritual context that got lost or reframed in translation over the following centuries. As with pretty much everything we cover on this channel, no single theory covers every detail perfectly. Ergot explains a hallucinatory trigger, but doesn't fit the sustained rhythmic movement. You don't typically see convulsion victims maintaining coordinated dance steps for a week straight. Mass psychogenic illness explains the spread and duration beautifully, but is inherently hard to prove with 500-year-old records instead of modern psychiatric observation and controlled study. And the deaths, genuinely documented, genuinely real, however inflated the specific daily counts might be, are hard to explain away as pure performance or exaggeration, since city officials had no obvious reason to fabricate a public health crisis they were actively, expensively trying to manage. What we're left with is a case that stayed relevant for half a millennium, precisely because it sits in that uncomfortable space between medical event and psychological event. A reminder that the line between mind and body isn't nearly as clean as we'd like to believe, especially under the kind of sustained collective stress that 1518 Strasbourg was drowning in. It's tempting to look back at events like this and feel a comfortable distance from them. Surely nothing like this could happen now. But the underlying ingredients, extreme stress, a shared cultural narrative, and a population desperate for some kind of release, aren't nearly as extinct as we'd like to think. They just tend to look different in a modern context. If you like your history genuinely bizarre and only partially explainable, you know what to do. Subscribe, and maybe sit this next song out.